Mavs had a Cinderella run to the finals this year. Experts would say it was unexpected, but Mavs fans knew Luka was going to be special. With another year under his belt, a finals berth was there for the taking. The more I look at this Mavericks roster, the more questions I find. Are they a young dynasty or a one-hit wonder? Every NBA playoffs has a bit of luck. Just last year, the Heat won Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals after Jason Tatum sprained his ankle in the first quarter and was hobbled for the rest of the game. In 2022, the Warriors didn't have to face the juggernaut Suns team because Devin Booker's adoption paperwork finally went through. Death, taxes, LeBron with the chase down block, all this is just normal NBA playoff randomness. Let's look at what these Mavs face during these playoffs to see if they're for real going into next season. In this year's playoffs, the Mavs only lost 5 games in the Western Conference before running into the Boston Avengers and getting gentlemanly swept. But let's not forget what led to this run. The Mavs finished 5th in the West behind a 3-headed monster at the top, and the Clippers. The Nuggets were still the heavy favorites in the West, and most experts had them penciled in for the finals. The Wolves finally figured things out with Cat and Gobert, and Anthony Edwards has emerged as one of the best two-way players in the game. The Thunder added Chet, and were in the running for the #1 seed all season, and now they're the favorites in the West for the 2025 playoffs. All 3 of these teams had higher net ratings than the Mavs. They were all considered championship contenders. The Mavs were not. In fact, the Mavs were 15th in the league in net rating. The Mavs made a couple huge trades at the deadline though, grabbing Dan Gafford and PJ Washington in separate deals. Both would eventually start every game for them in their playoff run. If we look at their stats with PJ and Gafford, they were a completely different team. They finished 6th in the league in net rating and went 22-9 over that stretch run. PJ and Gafford turned the Mavs into a totally different defensive team, and it allowed Luka and Kyrie to spearhead the offense. Kyrie went off after this trade, scoring 26 points per game on a ridiculous 62% true shooting. Despite this late season run, the Mavs weren't really in the championship contender inner circle, and yet they still made the finals. How did they do it? How did they just squeak through? Or were they truly dominant? Let's take a look at how they got there. In the first round, they drew a Kawhi-less Clippers. Not that that's unusual. That series opened with a 12-point loss in a game where the ghost of James Harden looked like the best player on the floor. People were saying the Mavs were done, but from there, the Mavs would go on to win 4 of the next 5 with a similar theme in each game. They gave the ball to Luka. More and more Luka. They tightened their lineups, and they gave the ball to Luka. They played really good defense before they would get the ball and then give it to Luka. His minutes skyrocketed to as high as 45 minutes in Game 4. And while his stats were massive, his nagging injuries and tweaks of ankles started to mount. In the next round, just glancing at the box score, it looks like the Mavs seemingly dominated the Thunder 4-2. But the team scored the exact same amount of points during that series. The exact same, 636 points total. Each team, it couldn't get more even than that. As a team, Dallas shot the lights out from 3 in this series, finishing it just below 40%. The league average is 36.6. And what did the Thunder shoot? 33.5 on basically the same amount of attempts. The Mavs got hot at the exact same time that the Thunder got cold in a series that was basically dead even. Oh, and that guy PJ Washington, who we traded for at the deadline, he had the worst corner 3-point percentage in the league during the regular season by a mile. But he caught absolute fire in that Oklahoma City series, like Kevin Hart shooting against Draymond Green. He shot a preposterous 47% from 3. He was their second leading scorer, ahead of Kyrie. And the Thunder's main defensive strategy was to try to contain Luka and Kyrie. They wanted guys like PJ and Derrick Jones Jr. to fire away from 3. Their plan worked until it backfired. This series is what propelled the Mavs to the finals. They basically won a coin flip against one of the toughest teams in the league, the #1 seed, and they weren't even supposed to be playing them in the second round. The Nuggets lost to the Wemby Spurs in the second to last game of the season, a game they were heavily favored to win. This loss ended up pushing Denver down to the 2 seed as Oklahoma City just randomly happened to have the tiebreaker. If Wemby hadn't gone crazy in that one night in April against the Nuggets, the Mavericks would have been going up against Joker in round 2. Instead, they took on Minnesota. And they were fortunate to face an exhausted T-Wolves team who had just won in a dogfight 7-game series against Denver. So not only was Minnesota tired, but the Mavs didn't even have to face the defending champion Nuggets at all. So you tell me, does this run scream championship contender heading into next season? Are you ready to bet on the Mavs? Kyrie was pretty unspectacular last year during the playoffs, averaging just 22 points per game, so there is room for an obvious improvement. It could be just him playing better in pressure situations is enough. Also, I want to say they swapped out the high-flying Derrick Jones Jr. for Najee Marshall, who I actually think will be better for them next. He's a better shooter, similar defender. Their main addition this offseason was Klay. Klay's shooting should help them a ton during the regular season, but he's a defensive sieve. Actually, they didn't get him for free. They traded for him, didn't they? And their main addition this offseason was Klay, who they got without giving up an important rotation player. Klay's shooting should help them a ton during the regular season, but he's a defensive sieve, and I just don't think that a lineup with Kyrie, Luka, and Klay can hang on the court for long stretches in the high-pressure, dominant Western Conference playoffs. The Mavs certainly are a better team than they were before that trade deadline. Klay adds an element they didn't have, a movement shooter who demands a ton of defensive attention. We see this in the Olympics right now. Steph Curry's not playing very well, but his gravity is still making plays easier for all of his teammates. And the Mavs frontcourt trio of PJ Gafford and an improved Derek Lively should still feast. Odds makers have them winning about 51 games. And also, you need to understand that Kyrie broke his hand during the offseason, adding a bit of murkiness to his readiness for next season. This team should be in the thick of the playoffs. As with every team, if they can stay healthy, I think they're primed to make another run. But the West is as tough as ever this year, and they're not quite considered a favorite at this point. They'd be lucky to make the finals again this year. I'm not ruling it out, but despite their improvements during the offseason, I think round 2 is the farthest this team can go next season. But what do you think? This is the Trash Talk channel. Jump in the comment section and tell me, are you betting on or against the Dallas Mavericks? I know they always are in a game when Luka Doncic shows up.